Today is the 20th of December 2019, and this is a conversation between Emilio Longo and Christopher West. Christopher, I'm pleased to welcome you to Skill-Based Art, a learning resource for art students and artist teachers. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Emilio, it's a pleasure to be with you and your listeners.
Thanks very much for joining me, Christopher. Now, I understand you're going to lead us in a prayer, is that correct?
I'd be happy to.
Fantastic. Whenever you're ready, please, Christopher.
Sure. Dear God, you are the ultimate artist, and you have fashioned us in your image and likeness as artists. We ask that your spirit would descend on us, on all human beings, that we would become the artists we are meant to be, reflecting your ultimate beauty, making visible your invisible beauty. We thank you that you sent your Son to make visible your invisible beauty. Open our eyes to the theology of our own bodies. The great masterpiece of your artwork is indeed the human body. Teach us to honor the mystery revealed through our bodies. We ask this in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful. Thank you very much for that, Christopher. Now,
Sure.
Let me begin by providing an overview of who you are and what it is that you do. Now, you were born in 1969 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. You are known as an affluent Catholic author and speaker worldwide. Concerning your credentials, you graduated from Lancaster Catholic High School in 1988. Following this, you received a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology in 1992 from the University of Maryland. In 1996, you were certified as an instructor of marriage preparation from the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. In 1997, you obtained a Master of Theological Studies at the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family at the Catholic University of America and became a certified catechist by the Archdiocese of Denver Catechetical School. You have also received an honorary doctorate from DeSales University. Since then, you have been delivering lectures and graduate-level courses predominantly on topics such as Christian anthropology, morality, the creed, marriage, sacraments, sexuality, and family life. This has seen you hold faculty positions at St. John Vianney Theological Seminary in Denver, the Institute for Priestly Formation in Omaha, and as a visiting professor of the John Paul II Institute in Melbourne, Australia, which became defunct as of 2018. However, you are best known by many as the predominant scholar of St. John Paul II's Theology of the Body. Today, you are president of Theology of the Body Institute, which offers graduate-level courses and other training programs on the theology of the body. You are currently professor of Theological Anthropology for the Master's Program, co-hosted by Theology of the Body Institute and Pontifex University. Regarding your writing, you have published multiple books over the years. Yearly, you travel around the world providing talks and seminars on topics including anthropology, particularly as it concerns our creation as male and female, marriage, family, and sexuality. Your work has drawn the attention of the New York Times, ABC News, Fox News, MSNBC, and numerous Catholic and evangelical initiatives. You and your wife Wendy reside in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and have 5 children. Now, Christopher, is my summary accurate? Is there anything I have missed that you would like to state, or perhaps anything you would like to expand upon?
It's one of the more thorough examinations of my career that I've ever heard shared in an interview. So you did your good research. You did some good research there, Emilio. I'd only add just recently I received my doctoral degree from Pontifex University, which was we have a great partnership with them at the Theology of the Body Institute. So it was a joy and a blessing to work through them to finally get the doctoral degree.
Ah, beautiful. So now it is now Dr. Christopher West.
It I guess it is. Yes, it is.
Fantastic. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Moving forward, do you recall when you first discovered St. John Paul II's Theology of the Body, and what impact did it have on you at the time?
Absolutely, I remember it. It was a life-changing moment. I can tell you the date because it was my sister's 20th birthday. It was September 26th, 1993. I was celebrating my sister's birthday at my parents' home, and one of her theology teachers from high school was visiting, And I had been studying the scriptures for a while, trying to understand why did God make us male and female, because I was myself experiencing a lot of pain, a lot of wounds in my life from living a sexual existence that was not bringing happiness, at least not the happiness that was proposed to me by the culture I was living in. And I was a man looking for answers. And over a period of 2 to 3 years, having studied the scriptures, I came to see what I would now call the spousal vision of the Bible, that the Bible begins with the marriage of man and woman, and it ends with the marriage of Christ and the church. And throughout the whole story of Scripture, it's a covenant love story. It's a story about marriage. The whole Bible in 5 words is basically this: God wants to marry us, and he wanted this eternal marital plan to be so obvious to us that he stamped an image of it right in our bodies. As I was saying earlier, God is the consummate artist, and he reveals his love, he reveals his heart, he reveals his inner plan, beauty, and design in his art. And we are that masterpiece, male and female. He created them. Stamped right in our bodies is this call to union. And it's all a sign of something heavenly. The very earthiness of the body reveals heavenly mysteries. And I was swimming in these waters just by studying the scriptures. And this theology teacher at my sister's 20th birthday, I was sharing some ideas with her, and she said, "Oh, you must have read John Paul II's Theology of the Body." And I thought, "No, what's that?" She said, "Oh my gosh, you're talking just like the Pope. I can't believe you haven't read this. You're going to love it." So I ordered this collection of talks that John Paul II gave called Theology of the Body the next day, and I just devoured it. And it was confirmation after confirmation that not only was I not crazy in what I had been learning, but the Pope took me to a whole new level. And Emilio, I really felt like I was holding in my hands the answer to the crisis of our times. And I knew I would spend the rest of my life at that point studying this teaching and sharing it with the world.
Beautiful. That's lovely. Now, you have stated that, quote, theology of the body is about redeeming, untwisting, uncrumpling what sin has twisted up, unquote. For listeners who may not be aware, can you provide a summary of essentially what the teaching involves and how it is relevant in our times?
Certainly. I gave a short summary in what I already said about, the biblical vision is one of marriage. God wants to marry us. What does that even mean? It means he wants to live with us in an intimate communion. I want to pick apart that word communion. It means common union. We are made for communion. And this is not just a spiritual reality. It's chiseled in our bodies. Think about it. But seen in light of each other, unless we are blind, there is a design, there is a plan, there is a destiny of the body. And it's communion. Man and woman are made for a life-giving, holy communion, a common union. A man's body does not make sense by itself. A woman's body does not make sense by itself. But seen in light of each other, unless we are blind, we see this call to a life-giving, holy communion. And what theology of the body unfolds for us is that our bodies, precisely in that call to holy communion, are a sign. The holy communion of man and woman is a sign that points to a much greater reality, the holy communion that is God himself. We believe as Christians that God himself is a holy, life-giving communion, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We're not saying here that God is sexual, but rather we're saying our sexuality is a reflection, an echo, if you will, in the created order of a heavenly, divine mystery. And God, as the consummate artist, reveals his heart in and through his art. And we are that art, male and female. He created them and he blessed them. And he said, be fertile and multiply. Now, clearly in our world today, we are becoming more and more blind to this understanding of the body. We could even speak in our world today of an eclipse of the meaning of the body. We live in a world that says the body is meaningless. It has no meaning. It's a blank slate. There's nothing given in the body. It's a blank slate, and we can assign any meaning or no meaning if we prefer. Whatever we prefer, we'll make the body what we want it to be. The body is meaningless. Well, Christianity has a very different message. And so here's where we find the rub between Christianity and the modern world. Christianity says the human body reveals ultimate meaning. We're just about to celebrate Christmas, and this is what Christmas is. It's ultimate meaning being revealed through the human body. In the fullness of time, God sent his son, a male child born of a woman. And so we see even here in the Christmas story, we see it's always the masculine and the feminine together that reveal the full story. When we fail to see this, we fail to understand who we are and why we're here and how we are to live and what our ultimate destiny is, and surely we suffer. So to answer your question, what is the pertinence today? Today in the modern world, we have almost lost complete sight and understanding of the meaning of the body. So John Paul II gave us this theology of the body as a man ahead of his times. He gave us this theology of the body in the 1980s because he saw already where the sexual revolution was headed. He saw that if you follow the sexual revolution out to its logical conclusions, we will ultimately lose all sense, understanding, and meaning of gender, of sexuality, of marriage, of the family, of the human person. So a man ahead of his times, he gave us this theology of the body as the antidote to the eclipse of the body that we are living through in our world today.
Lovely. That's a very, very lovely, fantastic, and thorough summary of theology of the body. Thank you for that, Christopher.
I wouldn't call it thorough. I wouldn't call it thorough because let's just keep in mind here, this is something I didn't share, but the theology of the body is a collection of 129 lectures that John Paul II gave over 5 years. Yeah. So what I just said in 10 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever is only scratching the surface of the surface's surface.
Wow.
You know, in the courses I teach for the Theology of the Body Institute, there are 2 30-hour courses. I call it Theology of the Body Level 1 and Theology of the Body Level 2, 60 hours of instruction. Wow. And at the end of those 60 hours, I tell my students, now you have a decent introduction to what John gave us.
That's amazing. It's such a comprehensive work it was. It's incredible that you've been able to decode it and pick it apart and present it in such a way that appeals to a contemporary audience.
Yes, it's my life's work, and I can't imagine doing anything else. It's my passion. It's my joy. It's who I am.
Lovely.
It's my mission.
Now, we can understand that the human body is a vessel which is sacred and divine that reveals our unity in Christ as we are created in his image and likeness. Now, the ancient Greeks had a tremendous piety for the body as evidenced in the Elgin marbles. How does the way the Greeks viewed the body differ from contemporary culture's perspective?
Well, I want to say this, Emilio. I'll share something that John Paul II himself shared. He reflects in a retreat he gave to artists as a young bishop. This was 1962. Mm-hmm. He was giving a retreat to artists in Krakow. And he shared the experience of looking with great intensity. And he said it was a labor of love that he was touring the Diocletian baths in Rome. And he was studying this. He even called it an obsession with the perfect human form that the Greeks had. Mm-hmm. They were looking for spotless beauty in the human body. They were looking for this idealized, perfect beauty in the human body. And he says, I labored that day to understand the heart of the Greeks. What were they looking for? And he said, I came to understand the gospel all the more. That what they were really looking for was perfect beauty manifested in the human body. And this is what Christianity is. Perfect beauty, ultimate beauty is God. What is Christianity? It is God, perfect beauty, ultimate beauty, manifested in the human body. The Word, the Logos, the ultimate meaning, the ultimate logic, the ultimate purpose, the ultimate reason, the ultimate beauty has been manifested in the flesh. This is astounding if it's true. This is a scandal if it's true. I'm thinking of a tweet that a friend just sent me the other day from a Muslim person who said how outlandish it is to think that the Almighty God was born of a woman and needed to feed at the breast and urinated and defecated all over himself and needed to be cleaned by his mother. He says, this is a lie. This is outlandish. This cannot be accepted. And interestingly, on the day my friend sent me that, the gospel reading was Jesus saying, "Blessed are those who take no offense at me." It is offensive to our own human sensibilities. We can accept the idea of a God so long as he's vague. God remains vague and kind of up there in the clouds. Sure, I can accept that. And my body, yeah, okay, here I am, a bodily creature. I can't deny it. Here's my body. I can deal with that. Okay. God in the heavens, sure, okay. My body, yeah. But the two do not meet in our minds. Christianity is the scandalous idea that the Almighty God made himself utterly vulnerable as an embryo hidden in the folds of a woman's womb.
That's a beautiful notion.
Real. If it's real, Emilio, it changes everything.
Absolutely, definitely. What a profound notion. That's just incredible. And can I ask you this, Christopher? If we were to analyze two images, the first being a nude Greco-Roman sculpture and the second being a pornographic image, can you elaborate how the former is considered decent and the latter indecent?
Yeah, sure. Well, John Paul II speaks about the difference between pornography and a proper portrayal of the human body in art extensively in his Theology of the Body. He dedicates 4 or 5 lectures to this topic, and they are so insightful and properly nuanced. This is not at all a puritanical fear of the body. When we understand Christianity properly, it does not at all promote a puritanical fear of the body. There have been many within the church who have not worked through their own issues and therefore portray Christianity as if it were a kind of puritanical fear of the body. But this is not our faith. This is not the true essence of Christianity. John Paul II, we must remember, says, not only says, but in his own actions, he demonstrates the importance of a proper portrayal of the naked body in art. How so? In the restoration project of the Sistine Chapel, John Paul II ordered the removal of many of the awkward drapes and loincloths that previous popes and clerics had painted over Michelangelo's original nudes. And when he dedicated the restored Sistine Chapel in the presence of these beautifully restored nude frescoes, he said, Michelangelo allowed himself to be guided by the evocative words from the book of Genesis that the man and his wife were both naked and felt no shame. And then he declared the Sistine Chapel the sanctuary of the theology of the human body.
That's right, yeah.
So what's the difference between the nudity in the Sistine Chapel and the nudity of pornography? John Paul II says it's in the intention of the artist. The Greeks, by and large, I mean, you could certainly find pornographers among the Greeks, but you could also find very tasteful artists among the Greeks whose goal was to portray the beauty and dignity of the human being through their portrayal of the dignity of the human body in its nakedness. Whereas pornographers, their goal is to portray the naked body with the explicit intention of arousing lust in the viewer. Now, what do we mean here by lust? Christ himself makes a very important point in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, if you look lustfully at another human being, you are adulterating the reality of the human being. What does it mean to adulterate something? It means to alter from its original intention. Ad alter, adultery, ad alter, to alter the original intention. Remember, in the beginning, as I just quoted, in God's original plan, man and woman are naked without shame. John Paul II says nakedness without shame is the key for understanding what it means to be human. Why? Because nakedness without shame reveals that erotic desire, as God designed it to be, is the desire to love divinely, faithfully, totally, fruitfully. Lust is the perversion of erotic desire. So this is something I learned from John Paul II that radically changed my life. He says that eros, E-R-O-S, that word we borrow from the Greeks, eros is the upward impulse of the human spirit towards all that is true, good, and beautiful. The problem is, because sin has entered the world, selfishness has entered the world, lust has entered the world, and here by lust we mean the perversion, the distortion, the adulteration, the altering of eros. We have another Greek word, porneia, right? We must never confuse eros with porneia. The pornographic is not truly erotic. The pornographic is the adulteration of the erotic. Here's another image we could use. I like to say, God gave us eros to be like the fuel of a rocket that has the power to launch us to the stars, to the infinite. But the tragedy of sin is that it inverts the rocket engines. That's lust. Inverted rocket engines. This is why so many of us, we go out into the world seeking joy, seeking love, seeking happiness, but it backfires on us because our rocket engines are pointed in the wrong direction. In the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus says, if you even look lustfully, he's not condemning the erotic. What he's saying is, let me redirect your rocket engines to the stars. Let me restore in you the original, beautiful, wonderful plan of God for erotic desire. Let me work that miracle in you. And if you do, it's a long journey. It's not a snap your fingers and then you'll be, launched to the stars. We have to go through a radical inner transformation to redirect our rocket engines to the stars. And that can take a lifetime. But it is the only worthy response to the erotic, is to allow ourselves to be transformed inwardly by the divine so that we learn to love divinely. Otherwise, all we end up doing is using other people in the name of the pornographic, in the name of the lustful, in the name of the adulteration of eros. We use one another, we wound one another, we hurt one another, and we bleed. We are deeply wounded in the modern world here. So wounded are we here that we are getting to the point that we hate the erotic. We hate our bodies. We are at the point where, and here's why we hate the body, because we're at the final lap of the sexual revolution. And how I know that, or why I think that, is as follows. We will eventually despise whatever we have idolized. And the sexual revolution failed to recognize the human body and human sexuality as an icon of something else, as a sign of something divine. And when we fail to recognize the body and sex as an icon of something greater, we stop at the body itself and we expect the body and sex to do something only the divine can do, provide perfect fulfillment of the human heart. And when sex turns out not to provide the perfect fulfillment we thought it would or desired it to do, and instead we find ourselves in pain, then we come to despise the thing we had idolized. And the war and hatred going on against the body and the true meaning of sex in the modern world is evidence that we are now despising what we idolized. And that's why I say We are at the last lap of the sexual revolution, and we desperately need a vision of the erotic, a vision of the body that will redirect our rocket engines towards the stars, that will recover a sense of the sacred in the body, that will recover the sense of the body as a sign, an icon, a sacrament, if you will, of something greater. And this, for your purpose, Emilio, and for the purpose of your listeners, this is the role and goal of good art.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I agree with your theories there 100%, Christopher. But can I ask you this? How about people who go to art galleries or museums and become offended when they see a depiction of a nude that has been created with purity of intention on behalf of the artist?
Well, let's just take a clear example. If someone goes into the Sistine Chapel and is offended by the nudes, the problem is not with Michelangelo. The problem is with the heart of the viewer who does not see the nude with purity of heart. Now, let me just say this before I say anything else. This is understandable that we think this way because of the frame most of us have been given to understand the body. The frame in which we are viewing the human body in the modern world 99.999% of the time is the pornographic frame. And so someone with a pornographic frame of reference who walks into the Sistine Chapel will most likely project that pornographic frame onto Michelangelo. But what is needed is not to cover over those nudes with draperies. What is needed is purity of heart. What is needed is the transformation of the heart of that viewer. What is needed, as John Paul II says, is a proper ethos of seeing. And what is that proper ethos of seeing? Jesus himself says it. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. We could add this. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see the mystery of God revealed through the naked human body. Now, getting there to that proper ethos of seeing, especially if you begin with that pornographic frame of reference, it's going to be a long, difficult, arduous journey of inner purification. But let us never, ever project our own impurity onto that which is pure. As St. Paul says, to the pure, everything is pure. But to the impure, nothing is pure. Why? Because they project their own impurity onto that which is pure. John Paul II has a term or an expression for those who project their own impurity onto that which is pure. He calls them the masters of suspicion. Mm-hmm. The masters of suspicion are those who are so crippled by their own impurity that they can't imagine any other way to see the world. Jesus himself speaks of this when he says, they look, but they do not see. The invitation of the gospel is to come and become one who sees. Those are the words of Jesus. Come, he says, and become one who sees. Let me open your eyes to the true, the good, and the beautiful in what is erotic. Christ does not, this is John Paul II, Christ does not want us to repress our erotic desires. Christ, John Paul II says, wants us to experience the fullness of eros. The fullness of eros, which implies, again, as I've been saying, that upward impulse of the human spirit towards what is true, good, and beautiful, so that what is erotic, John Paul II says, also becomes true, good, and beautiful. So few Christians know how to witness to this because we ourselves so often are bound by our own impurity. So we don't have, by and large, we rarely have an effective witness to Christian purity in the world. And so we confuse Christian purity with Puritanism, which is a fearful, suspicious rejection and eschewing of the body and sexuality. This is not our faith. This is not our faith.
That's beautiful, Christopher. And I'm quite taken by your idea of the St. John Paul II's idea of the masters of suspicion. And one thing that I see a lot of, especially when we're looking at a lot of contemporary figurative artists, they'll be posting images of their work up on Instagram, and oftentimes you would see a nude, half-clad female figure or male figure, and what tends to happen is the work of the artist tends to get banned. And something that's pornographic or semi-pornographic can easily pass. They have no problem passing that. But something that is made with purity of intention on behalf of the artist gets banned. I don't understand how. I mean, what their judgment is, or what their criteria is for accepting or not accepting a contemporary
Upside
image.
down world. In the modern world, we call good evil and we call evil good. Think of it from this perspective. Here in America, if a woman who's breastfeeding her baby is doing so in a public store, for example, here in America we have Targets or Walmarts or what have you. If she's there breastfeeding her baby, she will be ushered out of the store. But if you go through the checkout aisle at that same store, you're going to be bombarded with a pornographic portrayal of the breast.
Mm-hmm.
So we are calling good evil and evil good here in our world. We don't even know what breasts are for anymore in the modern world. And here on that note, let me tell you this. If you go to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, in the nave of the basilica, up in the arches of the nave, you have all of the Christian virtues represented in marble statues. And the virtue of purity is a bare-breasted woman holding very delicately in one hand a flower, a rose, and very firmly in the other hand, she's holding the horn of a unicorn. What is going on? Why is this the virtue of purity? You have to understand how the church regards art and the symbols here in this statue. First of all, a bare-breasted woman in the Christian imagination, in the history of Christian art, the mother giving milk, the baby at the breast. This is how Christianity, this is how the Catholic Church in her art has portrayed the virtue of Christian love, charity. The mother giving milk, the bare-breasted woman giving suck to her child. This is how the church portrays the virtue of charity, Christian love. So the virtue of purity, of chastity, right at the heart and center of it. The reason it has that bare-breasted woman is because at the heart and center of purity is Christian love. Love does not narrow our vision. It expands our vision so that we come to see the whole created world as an icon, a sign of something more, a sign of the divine. We are suffering from a crippling and stifling materialism in the modern world, where we reduce the physical to the merely physical, and we fail to see the physical as a sign of something divine and spiritual. Purity of heart sees the naked human body as a sign that points to something spiritual and divine. The human body is not only something biological and material, the human body is something theological and spiritual. This is our faith. This is what Christmas is. This is what it means that the Word was made flesh. This is our faith. Our faith is incarnational. Our faith is the making visible of the invisible. This is what art does. It pulls from the mysteries of the spiritual and heavenly realm and colors them, gives them shape and form or sound in the physical world. Art itself is a kind of incarnation. Art itself is a kind of witness to the sacred within the secular. It's a kind of witness to the invisible being made visible. Even when art is comes from a secular source, a true art is of its very nature, at its heart, something sacred because it makes visible the invisible.
Beautiful. And can I ask you this, Christopher? One of the staples of traditional figurative art is the practice of figure drawing. Now, when artists carry out drawing the figure from life, what do you think is happening on a deeper philosophical and theological level?
Are you asking me to comment on what's happening in the actual experience of someone in a figure drawing studio where a model is there in front of them?
Yeah, so what's going on in the heart of the artist, in the conscience of the artist, considering or taking into consideration that their intention is pure, that is.
Well, yes, so I was going to say there needs to be quite a qualifier here, because we have to hope, and we have to hope that the artist comes into that studio with purity of heart. Now, again, this is a tricky matter. It's kind of sticky. It's not so plain and simple because, as I was saying earlier, 99% of the time, we are coming from a pornographic frame of reference. And if we project that onto that model who is making himself or herself very vulnerable in dropping their robes, we will have an issue. We will have a problem. We will end up objectifying that person, treating that person as an object rather than as a person made in the image of God. But let's assume there is purity of heart in the artist. There are, again, the masters of suspicion who would say such purity is not possible. To them, I would say, come ye higher. There is more to see. Yes, it's a battle. Yes, it's difficult. Are we going to be perfect? No. But come ye higher. Come and become one who sees. It is possible to behold. For example, I'll tell you the story. A student told me this years ago. See, there is a difference between nakedness without shame and shameless nudity. Nakedness without shame is an experience of nudity in which shame is not required because those who are seeing the nakedness know how to honor it.
Sure.
So nakedness without shame is the experience of nudity in which shame is not necessary because those who are gazing at the nakedness are doing so with purity of heart. But shameless nudity would be an example or would be an experience of nudity in which one is lusting, one is treating the body as a thing, one is degrading the naked person, but shame is suppressed for whatever reason. For example, pornography, those who pose for pornography, they know they are subjecting themselves to degradation, but they suppress any shame about that. That is shameless nudity. So let me tell the story, and it demonstrates the distinction, and it does provide some insight to the question you posed about the art studio. So a student told me years ago in my classroom when I was explaining the difference between nakedness without shame and shameless nudity, my student said, "Thank you, Christopher. That helps me tremendously to understand an experience I had years ago. I was an art student, and I went into a figure drawing class, and a model came up before us and dropped her robe. But then she noticed that we had forgotten to pull the drapes on the windows. And as soon as she realized her nakedness was exposed to an unknown audience, she immediately put her robe back on." What does this tell us? It tells us that when she dropped her robe for the art students, she was not behaving shamelessly. Rather, she trusted the gaze of those artists to honor the dignity of her nakedness. Because as soon as she realized her nakedness was exposed to people she did not know and therefore could not trust, shame immediately manifested itself. And here, let me underscore, if this is not already clear, we often use shame in a solely negative sense. But here we're speaking of shame in a positive sense. Shame manifested itself in that model, not in a negative sense, as if she's ashamed of her body. She's not ashamed of her body. Rather, she covers her body to protect what she knows is the goodness and dignity of her body. The reason we cover the naked body in a broken, fallen world is not because the body itself is shameful or bad. This is not our faith. We cover our body in a fallen world, not because it's bad, but precisely because it is so good. And we feel, or should feel, an instinctive need to protect the goodness of the body from the threat of degradation.
It's like the storing of the Holy of Holies within the tabernacle of the church, right?
Correct.
We hide that.
Veil it. We veil the body not because it's bad. We veil the body because it's so good. And we feel the need to veil it to protect the goodness from degradation. Nakedness without shame is when the veil can be removed without the body being degraded. But shameless nudity is when the veil is removed precisely with degradation happening.
Sure.
That's pornography. The problem with pornography is not that it shows the naked body. The Sistine Chapel shows the naked body. The problem with pornography is the manner in which it shows the naked body precisely with the goal of arousing in the viewer a degrading attitude towards the body, an adulterous attitude, one that alters the body from its true meaning, purpose, and dignity, which is love. And to use another person for my own selfish pleasure is the direct opposite of love. Here, in the language of John Paul II, we have a keen insight. And I remember when I first discovered it 25 years ago, I felt so convicted by it, that the opposite of love is not hatred so much. Rather, the opposite of love is to treat another person as an object, as a means, to use that other person as a means to my own selfish gratification. That's the opposite of love. That's the problem with pornography.
Absolutely. And this leads into my next question. In the past, you have claimed that, quote, St. John Paul explains the distinction between the proper portrayal of nakedness in art and the improper one is the intention of the artist. If the intention of the artist is through the body to reveal the inner mystery of the person, then we have true art. But if through the portrayal of nakedness they are obscuring the person, we have pornography. So we could say this is kind of a paraphrase of John Paul II's idea that the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much of the person, but that it shows too little. It portrays the body in such a way that the person is not revealed at all, but the person is obscured, unquote. Now, I understand St. John Paul II has a whole teaching on the difference between the proper portrayal of nakedness in art and pornography, and you've already elaborated on that. And he was quite the advocate of the arts, so much so that in 1999 he wrote Letter to Artists, whereby he encourages Catholic artists to use their vocation to serve the church. Can you explain more about St. Paul's relationship with the arts and why he valued them so much?
Well, he himself was an artist. He himself was a playwright and a poet. And I'll share a story I know of because a professor of mine was a friend of John Paul II's. And in a conversation that the two of them had, John Paul II was asking my professor what he thought was the main means for sharing the Christian message with the world. Is it the written word? Is it the spoken word? What is the proper means of sharing the good news of Christianity? And my professor had some ideas, and then he asked John Paul II, well, what do you think is the best way? And without hesitating, he said the arts.
Mm.
If you think
Sure.
about it, it's been bad art that has led us down the path of the errors of the sexual revolution. It has been that pornographic stripping of the veil that has led us down this path into our own degradation and destruction. How do we overcome that? Well, you overcome evil with good. And if bad art or distorted art or evil art has been the thing that brought us down this path, pornography is just that, bad art, and we live in a pornographic culture. In other words, we live in a culture of evil art. We live in a culture that is art that degrades us by and large. How do we overcome that? With good art. With good art. We overcome evil with good. We need artists. John Paul II says we need artists. It's not an option. We need artists to proclaim the gospel. And this does not mean everything that an artist paints or sculpts or writes a poem about has to be explicitly a religious theme. But rather, John Paul II says that all true art is of its very nature religious, precisely for the reason that I shared earlier, because all true art is in one way or another taking invisible mysteries and making them visible. And John Paul II says in his letter to artists, even when art and the church seem far apart, even when art portrays the darkest aspects of evil, he says, nonetheless, hidden within that is a cry of the heart for redemption. And so there is a bridge to be built between art and the church, between art and Christianity. And again, I just want to underscore, we're not saying that artists, in order to evangelize, or artists in order to be of service to the gospel, need to portray specifically religious art. We're saying, because if your favorite thing to portray in art is a bowl of fruit or a landscape or the human body, well, do it with all you got. Give everything you have to becoming the best artist you can possibly be in portraying that bowl of fruit or that landscape or the human form. And by that very nature, you will be making visible something of the invisible. And you will be participating by that very nature in the mystery of the incarnation. And here I'm going to quote from one of my favorite artists. He's a musical artist. He's the lead singer of the band U2, Bono. I love their art. Their art has spoken to me so profoundly since I was a teenager in the 80s. And Bono says this. He says, the idea that every piece of art we make has to have the stamp of something Christian, explicitly Christian about it, is misguided. He says, you don't need to put a sign on a tree that says made by God, because that's redundant. The tree, if you are looking at the tree properly, you already know it's made by God. So all good art of its very nature comes from the inspiration of the artist. And if the inspiration of the artist is sincere, what does inspire mean? It means to be filled with the Spirit. And what Spirit? Again, if it is true, authentic, honest human art, it is inspired. What does it mean to be inspired? Filled with the Spirit. What Spirit? The Spirit of God.
Absolutely. What do you believe it was that made St. John Paul II such a successful leader of the Roman Catholic Church and vicar of Christ?
If I could put it in a phrase, it would be his deep interior life. What do I mean by that? I mean that he took very seriously that journey of inner purification that we've been talking about, Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. To get to that place, in other words, to get to the place of true art, one must take the interior life very seriously. We must be willing to continually look at the impurities within us, expose those impurities to grace, to divine love, to healing, to mercy, and be purified. All of us, we desire purity of heart, whether we call it that or not. We desire that integrity. Just to use an analogy, if I had a lump of pure gold in one hand and a lump of impure gold in the other hand, which lump of gold would you want?
The pure gold.
The pure one. John Paul II says in his letter to artists, we are all artists, and the greatest work of art that we can work on is ourselves.
Mm.
And John Paul II is an artist who took that seriously. He worked on himself, allowing whatever impurities in his own gold to be refined. But again, to go with that image, how does that happen? How do you refine gold? How do you purify gold? Only through fire. And we all must pass through those purifying fires of divine love. And we must not resist the burning. It stings, it hurts, it burns to be purified. But the fruit of that purification is we come more and more to see the world as it really is. We come more and more to see all that is true, good, and beautiful about the world and about the human person. And at the same time, we suffer more because we see how tragic it is that we are so often blind to the true beauty and goodness of the world and the human person. But this is where, in the Christian life, the agony and the ecstasy, they go together. And sin always involves a kind of grasping at the ecstasy and a refusal of the agony.
Sure. And it is fascinating to consider the series of events that has led to the body being misinterpreted and misrepresented in mass media. Now, I understand you attribute this deterioration of knowledge to original sin, and you've elaborated on this somewhat already. How has original sin muddied the true meaning of the body? So if we go back to the beginning, that is.
It is what has muddied the true meaning of the body. That's the source. Now, what do we mean by original sin? These are theological ideas, and sadly in our world today, we've lost literacy with theological language. So we say things like original sin, and we don't even know what it means anymore. What does it mean? It means something is wrong inside of us. If we're honest with ourselves, everyone looks at the world and says something's wrong. Something ain't right. There's something messed up in the modern world. And here I want to refer to a beautiful insight, a humble insight of G.K. Chesterton. 100 years ago, G.K. Chesterton and several scholars were asked to write an essay, what is wrong with the modern world? And many scholars submitted, grandiose and verbose examinations and explanations of what's wrong with the modern world, extensive essays. G.K. Chesterton instead submitted a 2-word answer to the question, what is wrong with the modern world? I am, he said.
Oh, that's fantastic, isn't it?
It is. And that's what we mean by original sin. The problem with the modern world is not just out there somewhere. The problem with the modern world is within me. It's within you, Emilio. We have to be, this is what I was saying earlier about the reason John Paul II was so effective is because he recognized the problem with the modern world was within him. And he took the solution seriously, which is to go deeply on that interior journey of inner purification by fire. That and that alone can restore in us a vision of the world as God created it to be. Now, that is not to say any of us in this life will ever return to the state of innocence, right? We've left nakedness without shame behind. But the good news is we can go forward. And we have this astounding belief as Christians in the resurrection of the body. You know, every religion known to man has some kind of belief in an afterlife, but only Christianity proclaims resurrection of the body.
Sure.
The afterlife of most of the world's religions is just a spiritual afterlife. We leave the physical world behind and we enter some spiritual realm. But Christianity claims that the spiritual realm itself entered this physical realm. The Logos was made flesh. And when the Logos returned to the heavenly realm, he didn't leave the flesh behind. He took it with him. And he invites us to have that same hope that our bodies will also be with him in another realm of existence, a realm where every tear is wiped from our eyes, where we see one another again as we really desire to be seen. St. Augustine said, the deepest desire of the human heart is to see another and to be seen by that other's loving gaze. I will ask my audiences, Emilio, when I'm giving presentations, I'll say to the women, do you prefer to be seen? Do you prefer to be seen or do you prefer to be looked at? Never has a woman raised her hand and say, I prefer to be looked at. And they intuit right away there's a big difference between being looked at and being seen. The desire of the human heart is to be seen, not merely looked at, because when we're looked at, we're evaluated based on whether or not we give pleasure to someone else. And if we do give pleasure, we'll be used and consumed. If we do not give pleasure, we'll be disposed with. Either way, we're being treated as an object, not as a person. To see the other, truly see the other, is to be in absolute awe of the dignity, beauty, and goodness of the human person, to such a degree that we are ready and willing to sacrifice our very lives for the other person. This is
absolutely.
Speaking of good art, may I share an example?
Sure, please do.
These themes that I'm unfolding here are unfolded with great clarity and insight in, of all places, the movie Toy Story 3. This is good art. Here, new to the story, is a stuffed bear named Lotso. And he is the self-appointed tyrant leader of all of the toys at Sunnyside Daycare. And we're meant to hate him, and we do, until we learn his backstory. Years earlier, Lotso was Daisy's favorite toy. She took him everywhere, including on a family vacation when she mistakenly left him behind at a rest stop. Lotso travels through the storms and reaches Daisy's house, and he looks in the window and he sees Daisy playing with another stuffed bear just like him. And this is when the narrator says, at this moment, Lotso snapped and became a monster inside. Why? Because he had been dispensed with and replaced and considered repeatable. This is what wounds us most deeply, when we're treated as dispensable, replaceable, and repeatable. This wounds us profoundly because the human person is indispensable, irreplaceable, and unrepeatable. Later, Lotso says to Woody the cowboy, right, Andy's favorite toy, he says, you think you're special, cowboy? You ain't nothing but a piece of plastic. You're meant to be thrown away. See, the whole theme of Toy Story 3 is that human beings are not meant to be toyed with. And when we look at another human being, we toy with them. But when we see another human being, we're on the journey of learning how to love them and sacrifice ourselves for them. Another scene in Toy Story 3, the Ken doll is about to sacrifice himself for the Barbie doll because the Barbie doll is about to fall into a trash dumpster. And Lotso says, "What are you doing, Ken? She's a Barbie doll. There's 100 million just like her." And Ken says, "Not to me, she's not. She's the only one." And Barbie, of course, she melts. Why does she melt? Because Ken sees her as indispensable, irreplaceable, and unrepeatable, and worth sacrificing his own life for. See, this is Jesus. Sees us as indispensable, irreplaceable, and unrepeatable. And he's ready to sacrifice his very life so that we would know who we really are. This is the invitation of the gospel. Come and become one who sees.
Lovely. In earlier centuries, modesty was a virtue that was practiced by many religious in various facets of their lives, from modesty in dress to modesty in manner and conduct. As you have stated, quote, "We have the tendency to cover our bodies when we're not being properly seen," unquote. To reveal more of the body through the way one dresses is more in line with contemporary culture's views. When once upon a time it would have been considered indecent for a lady to reveal her ankle in public, now we have people wearing clothing that hugs every curve of the body, not leaving very much to the imagination. What do you think the agenda behind this is?
The agenda behind this is to arouse lust. This flows precisely from the place of in the human heart that I was just speaking from, which is we look but we do not see. See, when we substitute the look for being seen, see, we desperately ache and yearn to be seen, but we substitute, we doubt that that's even possible. We've settled for so much less here. We will settle for the lustful look because it's an approximation. It gives us a little satisfaction when people look at us, but it's not what we really desire. We don't merely want to be looked at. We want to be seen. The world is training us how to look and be looked at. But what we really desire is to see and be seen.
Absolutely. So in that case, Christopher, in regards to that idea of dress in the contemporary times, does that mean that we go back to dressing as one did centuries ago?
No. Where... See, here we mustn't confuse again Christian purity with Puritanism. Right? 100 years ago, when it was scandalous to see a woman's ankle and a, quote, respectable woman wore as much as 25 pounds of clothing when she appeared in public, this is not healthy. We've gone from one end of the spectrum to the other. We have just flipped the puritanical pancake over from repression to indulgence, right? But here's what Christianity holds out. Christianity holds out another way to see, another way to think, another way to experience the body. Repress and indulge are not the only two options. There's a thing called the redemption of the body that Christianity holds out, which is a new ethos of seeing, of living with the freedom for which Christ set us free, with the purity for which Christ has set us free. And this does not lead to dressing in a frumpy way or dressing in a way that masks the fact that you're a man or a woman. John Paul II himself says in his marvelous book, Love and Responsibility, that accenting sexual values in the way we dress is not in and of itself immodest. He says what is immodest is when we dress in such a way only with the intention to excite and incite the lustful look, the degrading look. we should dress and behave and hold our bodies in such a way that we invite others to see us integrally, not just look at us and evaluate us lustfully. That's the role of modesty, to enable the body to be seen, which is to say, to enable the person to be seen, because we are body persons. The body is not something, the body is someone. And the reason we relate so much to Toy Story 3 there, that story I told, I know it's kind of strange. We're talking about stuffed bears and Ken and Barbie dolls, but the point is this, the toys are us. The toys, we relate to these toys because the toys fulfill the dignity of the person, what we're really after deep in our hearts. So again, when it comes to dress, we must not confuse purity with puritanism.
Absolutely, sure. And that's great advice as well. Moving on, Christopher, can you explain more about the theology of the Blessed Virgin's body, particularly in relation to Our Lady of Guadalupe?
I could go on for hours and hours about Our Lady of Guadalupe, and for those interested, you can just Google Christopher West, Our Lady of Guadalupe, and you'll see a little mini course on YouTube that I did about the symbols in this work of art, and I don't mean art in the sense of a human work of art, because even scientists are baffled by the idea of this image on the tilma. Which a tilma is a piece of rough cloth that the native people wore in Mexico 500 years ago. And if you don't know the story, Juan Diego, young peasant, Native American, had an encounter with the Blessed Virgin Mary, and she imprinted an image on his tilma, this rough cloth that he was wearing. And scientists are baffled because there are no brushstrokes. This is really and truly a heavenly work of art. Heaven has delivered some art to us here on the tilma. And what does it reveal? It's the perfect enculturation of the gospel message in the language of the Aztecs. This is what's fascinating. It's speaking the language of the native peoples, where we're written right into the imagery. It's the alphabet, if you will, of the native people. It's a codex. They didn't have letters in their alphabet. They had symbols from nature. And all of these flowers that are on the tilma and the stars, and it's just full of symbols. And just briefly, I'll say this. When the Aztecs looked at the tilma, the way the woman did her hair, they knew she was a virgin. When they looked at a ribbon over her womb, they knew that she was pregnant. And right over her womb is also a 4-petaled flower, which in the artistic symbolism of the Aztec people, that was their sign for the divinity. When the Aztec people looked at the tilma, this woman of Guadalupe, they saw virgin pregnant with God. And they saw this virgin pregnant with God was conquering the evil that was afflicting them in their day. I urge you, please learn more. Google my name, Christopher West, Our Lady of Guadalupe, to learn more about that. But what I want to leave everybody with right now is this idea that the tilma shows us how to enculturate the gospel, how to bring the culture to an understanding of the gospel using the language of the culture. The Aztecs were a culture of the image, and it was the image of the tilma that helped them understand the good news of this virgin pregnant with God. Similarly, we are a culture of the image today, and we need to find ways of putting the mystery of the incarnation into images that speak to our culture today.
Sure. Thank you for that, Christopher. And I wanted to mention as well, with the Aztec culture, they had a distorted view of this idea of redemption of the body through, if I recall this correctly, tearing at the hearts of the perpetrators and offering them to God. However, later they understood that the only way really to offer the heart to God was through the Blessed Virgin.
That is
that
correct. There's so much more to be said there. They had an understanding of sacrificing the hearts of human beings in a bloody way to appease the gods. But what the Tilma revealed to them is that the heart of God himself, in the person of the Son conceived in the womb of the Virgin, has been offered. The heart of Christ is what appeases the gods, so to speak, right? It is the heart of Christ that is our salvation. He offered that sacrifice of his own heart so that we don't have to be ripping one another's hearts out. And heck, that has a lot to say for us today in our own culture. It's not that we're actually cutting people's chests open and ripping their hearts out, but in a figurative way, we are breaking one another's hearts in the modern world. We are tearing one another's hearts out in the modern world because we don't know how to love. Christ has offered his heart to teach us how to heal our hearts.
Absolutely. Approaching the end of our interview, in conclusion, the art world nowadays seems to shun the topics of emotion, beauty, God, and truth. This also seems to be the trend in culture at large. Make conversation about the weather, sports, or any other subject of small talk, and you'll get plenty of responses. However, when the more serious issues of life and death are discussed, people seem to perhaps become a little uncomfortable. Some are afraid to go deep, worried perhaps that they may say too much and therefore reveal too much about themselves. Revealing our true self is perhaps something we are very cautious of for fear of judgment or for fear of being hurt. As we have learnt throughout the interview, perhaps some people only reveal their true self to their spouse, for they have the capacity to see their significant other on the toilet and they don't think it's gross. They are loved in all of their imperfections. Now, that was a reference to the story you told about asking children about what true love means, and one of the children stating true love is when mum sees dad sitting on the toilet and doesn't think it's gross. The question here is, what is wrong with revealing all there is to revealing about yourself and letting the chips fall where they may? I understand in your younger days you used to believe that the saints were people who had everything together. They were perfect. However, later you learnt that this in fact wasn't true. Ultimately, the saints were people that let all their imperfections hang out for the world to see, not selectively choosing only the best parts of themselves to show. As you have stated, quote, a saint is not someone who is perfect. A saint is someone who knows he or she is perfectly loved in all of their imperfections, unquote. Ultimately, loving and being loved is the deepest desire of our heart, or the cry of the heart, as we have discussed. Indeed, we should be loved as we are, and not by the image we may have of our perfect self. I understand a man who impacted your life greatly and who exemplified this idea of being perfectly loved in your imperfections was Monsieur Lorenzo Albacete, a Catholic priest and theologian who was a, quote, a disheveled guy, a man who knew he was a mess, but knew he was loved, and his messes were on display, unquote. To conclude the interview, Christopher, would you like to talk about the impact Monsieur Albacete had on your life and how he helped you become comfortable with your own imperfections?
Yeah, again, I could go on for hours and hours about the impact of this man in my life in answer to your question. I just have to sum it up right now for the sake of trying to keep things relatively brief. But let me go back to something you said there. You said something about a saint is someone who lets all of their imperfections, lets them be on display for others. And there's a certain truth to that. But at the same time, what's more important is that we expose our imperfections to the God who loves us perfectly. It's not that we should be having all of our wounded, broken humanity just bleeding out for everyone all the time, because that there's a certain modesty required there as well. But we should not be so afraid to have our imperfections on display. A priest said to me one time, and I'll spell it just for the sake of not causing those who might be offense, but he was a very plain talking priest. And he said, Christopher, you think a saint is someone who has his SHIT together. He says, no, a saint is someone who has all of his or her SHIT open to the merciful love of God. That changed my life. I grew up in a kind of crippling perfectionism that believed that in order to be lovable, I had to get my SHIT together. And the good news of the gospel is that God loves me right here where I am, as I am, in all my SHIT. But also, he doesn't want to leave me there. He wants to pull me out of that SHIT. And I got to let him. I got to let him love me right where I am. I got to let him come be with me right in that SHIT. And I got to let him lead me out of it. That's the journey of inner purification we were talking about earlier. And I would say Lorenzo Albacete, this beautiful, disheveled, imperfect human being, left such a mark on my life precisely because he knew that love. In his bones, he knew that love. He was the professor I was commenting on earlier in the interview who was a friend of John Paul II's, who had that conversation with John Paul II about the way to reach the culture. And John Paul II said the way to reach the culture is art. That was Lorenzo Albacete. I had Lorenzo in class in 1995 when I was a student at the John Paul II Institute in Washington, D.C. And I don't remember much of what he said in his lectures. I do remember some things. But what I remember was the impact he left on my heart through his witness. This overweight, chain-smoking, totally disheveled human being had some encounter with a mystery that changed his life. And the mystery was not an abstraction. He encountered that mystery in a pizza. He encountered that mystery in the cigarette he was smoking. He encountered that mystery in the cream-filled donuts he loved to bring to class. And he would walk into class and powdered sugar would be all over his clerics, or pizza sauce would be dripped on his clerics. And he had this dramatic comb over. You know, he was going bald and he did the comb over on his head and he just looked crazy, but he knew he was loved. He was a free man. He was a man who didn't wear masks. And that's what I learned from him. The man behind the mask is the real lovable human being. And I was a man who wore so many masks because I had been so hurt in my life, so rejected in my life. I started wearing masks at a very early age because I didn't want to be hurt anymore. Well, this guy, Monsignor Albacete, he had learned how to take the masks off because he knew he was loved underneath those masks. That's the witness
Beautiful.
of the gospel. We're loved. We're seen. We're known. We don't have to exchange being seen for a cheap look. When we know we're loved and seen, and when we know we're seen and loved, we can be who we really are. We can take the masks off, and we can invite others to do the same. That's what Monsignor Albacete did for me. And in as much as he did that, he was a true artist. That's what true artists do. They take the masks off. They remove, I mean that figuratively, of course, they remove that which blocks us from seeing what is true. They enable us to see what is real. They respectfully remove the veil. Tenderly, gently remove the veil to see, not just look at, but to see what's underneath, to love what's underneath, to honor and respect what's underneath. That's what it means to be an interior person. We know we're seen there, and so we are given the ability to see others there as well. Not that we do it perfectly, there's always more, but that's the journey we're invited on. come and become one who sees. That's the journey Monsignor Lorenzo Albacete invited me on all those years ago. And that's the journey I want to invite my students on as well.
Beautiful. What incredibly rich advice. And he seems like such an incredible man. Must have been a real privilege to have known him. Christopher, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate you sharing your incredible views on theology of the body and on culture in general. And I just wanted to end by asking you if you wanted to provide your contact information so that listeners can learn more about your work, or perhaps any projects that you're working on currently that you'd like to advertise.
Sure, I'd be happy to. If you want to learn more about my work, just go to theologyofthebody.com. It'll take you right to the Theology of the Body Institute website. I would invite anyone to consider. We've had many people from Australia. We've had many people from around the world travel to Pennsylvania here in America to take the 5-day retreat that we call the Head and Heart Immersion course in John Paul II's Theology of the Body. And we have an entire master's degree program. We have an entire master's degree program offered in conjunction with Pontifex University. I'd encourage any students out there to look into that. And this master's degree program with Pontifex has a special emphasis on the arts. Pontifex University has a special emphasis on evangelizing culture through the arts. So all the themes that we've been talking about in this interview, this is what we unfold in this master's degree program. You can major in this. You can get your master's degree in this vision of life and love and arts and culture if it's of interest to you. One more thing I'll suggest. My wife and I do a podcast, and it's been such a joy. We've been doing it for about a year now. We have about 50 or so episodes, and we put out a new episode every week. It's called the Ask Christopher West podcast, but it's co-hosted by Wendy West. And my wife, if I don't mind saying so myself, she is a gem. We get emails from around the world of people who just have been so blessed by my wife, and it doesn't surprise me in the least because I've been married to her for 24 years, and I know how blessed I am by her. So I would invite you to get that feminine perspective as well and see how this unfolds in the complementarity of male and female by subscribing to that podcast.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Christopher. Again, appreciate your time and all your effort in elaborating your answers today. And I hope that in the future we can have more contact to see about how the arts and the ideas that are explicit in the theology of the body can be used to serve the new evangelization. So thank you very much. And I hope to speak
Thank
with
you,
again
Emilio.
sometime.
It's been a pleasure to be with you and your listeners. God bless and take care.
Thanks, Christopher. God bless. Take care. Bye-bye now.